Welcome to the Brodart Tell Me More Global Voices webinar. My name is Elenita, and I am excited to moderate. Today's standout authors take us on a journey through the charming villages and towns of England and Scotland, sharing rich stories and fresh perspectives from voices beyond the United States. Our first presenter, L.J. Ross, an international best-selling author, best known for her creating atmospheric mystery and thriller novels, including the D.C. Ryan series of Northumbrian murder mysteries, which we'll hear about today. And this series has sold over 10 million copies worldwide. So today we're going to be talking about The Impostor. Over to you.
Hello, hi everybody. Thank you so much for having me on the platform today. So I write as LJ Ross, but my name is Louise. And yes, I was a lawyer first before deciding to become a writer. Now, Imposter is actually the first in my Dr. Gregory series, which is slightly different to my Northumbrian murder mysteries, which feature DCI Ryan. But for anyone who loves Ireland, this would be a perfect starting point for you. So, to give you a little bit of an overview of what it's about, imagine a man who, with his longtime friend and mentor, had set up this elite criminal profiling unit. They are psychiatrists by profession and met while working at one of the most chilling parts of the UK, which is probably, Broadmoor Hospital, or in my books, Southmoor Reimagined, which is a special hospital for the criminally insane. So they met while working there, dealing with some of the darkest minds, and decided to set up this elite criminal profiling unit to help the police around the world, but particularly in the United Kingdom, to find those dark minds before they wreak more havoc. Unfortunately for them, there was a scandal, things went wrong, and they were thrown under the bus. So he has sworn to lead a quiet life. They've gone back to their normal day jobs. He's working at Southmoor. But then the call of duty comes again, this time from a small Garda team in the fictional village of Ballyfinny, which is in County Mayo. Now, for anybody who might have visited Ireland before, let me paint a picture. So, County Mayo is in beautiful western part of Ireland. And I remember going there myself with my family, my husband and two children, and we visited at Ashford Castle, which is a beautiful castle right next to the village of Cong. Now, you might know this village from having seen the movie The Quiet Man with John Wayne. And it's a real place. It's absolutely adorable, very picturesque on a lake, hills all around. And the castle itself is now a hotel in real life. But in my story, it's a very different landscape. And in this beautiful little village where everybody knows everybody else, there has been a brutal murder of a local woman, a local mother specifically, and they just don't have any leads. They are loath to think that one of their own could have done this, but really that's where everything's leading them to. So, in desperation, they contact Professor Douglas, who in turn speaks to his friend, Dr. Alexander Gregory, and the two of them decide that he should go over and help wherever he can. So that call of duty comes again. Really with wanting to write this book, I was exploring various different themes. First and foremost, I suppose, human nature and the idea of redemption. So Gregory himself is quite an enigmatic character, but as a reader, I think, you hopefully get the idea that he's got a good heart and he wants to do the right thing, but he has a bit of a kind of mystery background himself, which you find out a bit more about as you go through the book. So that's a sort of secondary thread, which I think as a character makes him so Moorish, because you're desperate to know what leads a man to do this kind of work, and what makes him capable of having that kind of insight and dealing with some of these dark minds without becoming dark himself. And so that's really something that led me to want to kind of explore that psychology, which I find fascinating anyway. My own mother is a psychologist, and before doing the law, also did a master's degree in psychology. So I find those themes really fascinating. And for anyone else who likes true crime, I suppose there are shades of Mindhunter, shades of those kind of big true crime cases that provide some inspiration and texture to the mystery that's woven here. It's very atmospheric, I suppose, because I like to make the landscapes a character in themselves, and having visited more than once that part of the world and loving it very much, in as much as that I've written a dark story, I also wanted to offset that darkness by painting the landscape as much as I could on the pages of my book. So I suppose as you read through this book, you'll find out who really is the imposter. And I very much hope you enjoy it.
Now you use their mom is become she's the mayor of the town, and then the two sons are investigators and they're from different areas, yet
Mhm.
they're not true siblings in that they have a different parent. Is all of that part of building the psychological thriller or the aspects of the story?
Yes. So when Gregory goes across to try to build up an idea of a profile of why this killer is killing as he is, um, looking at past cases, which is all he has to really go on, because it's more of a science than it is instinct, So he's looking at past cases that he's dealt with, and one of the things that comes up is past childhood trauma or an overbearing mother figure. A lot of these tropes that sometimes feed into the behavior, certainly retrospectively when you look at serial killers and the like. So, in this case, I decided to have these two male siblings as having the same mother, but only one of them with a biological link, another one having suffered trauma in an Irish orphanage as a child and then having been taken in. However, the biological sibling still had his own trauma, not only because his mother is such a strong character, albeit a good one, I hope, but because he also saw his own father's death. So they each have trauma that they're carrying. So as you go through the story, every time you think you know who would be the more likely suspect, then you find out something else about another character, which also fits the profile. So the idea really is that almost anybody could be a suspect.
And that's what, yeah, that's what it feels like. Like different characters come up that you think, oh, well, that could be the person. But you do have several twists throughout. And also to the very end, you have a really great twist. So the
Thank you.
imposter is could be several people.
Very much so, yes. Several meanings, several people. I think that also kind of comes from a mirroring of human behavior, just in general. It's a reflection of real life, because I think at times in our lives we've all felt like a bit of an imposter in challenges that we face or in paths that we've taken. And that's no different to Gregory on the page, and indeed many of them, as you say, with the characters that they pose. And I think as a writer, that was really, I loved crafting this book. This is one of my favorite to write, and for that reason, it was weaving it all together and actually creating a sense of distrust even amongst the characters as well.
And you also use the terrain, like you say, you've been to Ireland, the rain and being in the back of homes and how the neighborhoods are set up so
Mm.
that the murderer actually has some access that a lot of the neighbors wouldn't even realize that they're a stranger or that they're
Mm.
doing this.
Well, it was a bit of a challenge. I think it's always, as a writer, a challenge to try to sort of take spaces that are, or locations that are essentially, expansive, and try to create a feeling of claustrophobia for the reader. And that's really what I wanted to try to achieve with this, to really bring things small for you, whilst also appreciating that you're in a setting that is, as I say, expansive, big skies, big landscapes over there in Ireland. Um, and as the story goes on, I deliberately try to make that a bit smaller, so that towards the end you really feel that someone could tap you on the shoulder and it might be them, and that again was something that I was able to visualize, remembering the space. I mean, of course, it's the real life village of Kong is more like of an inspiration, but I took pieces and bits and pieces of the feeling, and certainly with the woods that I write, the kind of eerie darkness. As you come through the castle, there is a huge woodland space along the driveway that actually borders the village as well. So that is very much real. It's a big, long, winding driveway. It's it definitely has the spook factor. So that was something that was very easy to call upon when I was putting it onto the page. But in terms of those sort of access things, again, coming back to the idea of a criminal profile, it's also a common feature that someone who stalks and then kills, they start off kind of picking someone who's a little bit further away from home. And then as they grow in confidence, they move closer to their own home and on their own doorstep. So that's something that certainly Gregory was factoring in mind. So all of these different things as the net closes in is something that readers can kind of try to track themselves. So I hope it's a book where clues are in there and people can try to solve it for themselves, which I think is always fun. But if not, I also hope that it's something at the end that, as you say, there's a twist to give you a final shock.
Yeah, and even finding the murderer. I mean, I'm one of those people that I like to read a mystery and then try and figure out who the murderer is. You did have a few clues because you're not saying it's a woman or a man. So you were being very careful with that. So it was a very interesting twist. And also showing that the two police officers might have been
Mhm.
guilty as well, which I love that. Yeah, and then you had the a priest, and I mean, you just have different characters that you think, oh, it could be that one. So it really keeps the questioning in your own mind as the reader.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's also I think every book as a writer is a journey of exploration. I loved the research element. It's always fun. I mean, the hardest part is finding out almost too much about the characters that you could write, and then having to be selective, so as to allow space for the reader to imagine the rest, because sometimes it's not about what you say, it's what you don't say. um, so I think that the secondary thread of Gregory's own life was something that in this first book I really build the foundations for. And so going forward into the series, readers who choose to read on can really sort of develop their understanding of him from this very strong sort of springboard at the end of the book, and things like that. So yeah, it's something that I hope readers can find something in if they like landscapes or if they like character driven novels, but also a good sort of meaty murder mystery. I think it has a little bit of something for everyone, I hope.
What is your research process? You mentioned in research. What is that process?
Well, it really depends on the book, but I tend to start from the landscape. So in this case, I did a bit of reading around, the police service over there or the Garda, and also finding out a little bit more, pushing out about the locational setting. So I was familiar with a part of it, but obviously not being Irish myself, I wanted to try to do it justice. Certainly all of the airports nearby, all of the a bit about sort of religious practices, but also not too much. It was again being selective and not overloading people, because that is the danger, I think, of research. It can slow the pacing of a novel if you make it too heavy, and it's a bit of an enemy to the characterization, because I think, certainly in my opinion, you find out more about a character when they just bounce off the other characters in the story, and their reactions to the other characters in a situation tell you more about them than maybe just a description of the table they're sitting at. So my research, I tend to deep dive, but then I tend to leave about 80% of it in the file, because you always have more than you need.
Yeah, yeah, and you definitely have it so that the characters are playing off of each other and coming up with clues and ideas and questions throughout that process as well.
Thank you.
So now we're going to go to Gordon Brown, which is uh, aka Morgan Cry, is the Scottish crime writer and founding director of the Bloody Scotland Festival, who uses the pen name Morgan Cry for his crime and thriller novels, including the recently published novel The Cost. And as Morgan Cry, he writes about a disgraced police constable named Blake Glover and has a sequel, which you will hear about today. You'll hear probably a little bit about both The Fracture and The Cost. The Fracture will release in November. Over to you, Gordon Morgan.
Thanks very much. My name's Gordon Brown, but I write as Morgan Cry. And for those looking at I want that photograph on the back of my jacket. It makes me look about 10 years younger than I actually am. So I think that's where I'm going to start. A bit about me. I live in Scotland, but I split my time between Scotland and Spain. I spend quite a bit of time out there. Have written a couple of books set in Spain. I've got two kids and I'm married, and I started life in Scotland and I'm now back in Scotland, although I enjoy the sun. My writing career, I kicked off in 2009. I have 13 books out when it comes to The Fracture. My first book, which started many years ago, is a book called Falling, which started with one line. I had one line and only one line and no plan, and wrote the entire book in 3 months, sent it off to a publisher. The publisher said it was very good, but it was full of typos and mistakes and I don't know what else. And it turned out I hadn't sent them the latest copy. I'd sent them a copy from a month before, but they still printed it. So I thought there must be something in this. From my own point of view, if I'm going to talk about the two books, there's The Cost and The Fracture. The Cost is the first in the series. It's just out. The Fracture comes out in November the 4th. To understand where the books come from, it's quite important, the backstory on this, because the book is set in Fraserburgh, which is a fishing town on the northeast shoulder of Scotland, as far out in the northeast shoulder as you can get. It's one of those towns where there's no real reason to go to unless you're going there, because once you get there, you just have to pass on. You don't pass through it to get anywhere. But the reason it's important to me is my father came from there. My father was born in Fraserburgh, my grandfather and my grandmother. And my father, many years ago, left the town, served his national service, which in the UK means he had to work in the army for 2 years. And then when he came back from the army, he went to Glasgow in the central belt of Scotland to get a job, met my mother, and took up the role of police officer in the Glasgow Police. And having been a police officer, he was there for 25 years, and he only ever served as a PC. He never wanted to be a sergeant. He never wanted to be a detective. And when I came to writing this book, my dad used to say to me that at some point he would go back to his hometown of Fraserburgh. Unfortunately, my father passed away when he was 48, so he never got the chance to go back home. So when I came to write this book, write the books, The Cost and The Fracture, I took that idea and said, so what if? What if a police constable serves in a police force for 30 years and then retires and goes back to his hometown, but a hometown he's not been back to in 40 years? And in the first book, the reason it works that way is that in the first book, Blake, the name of the main protagonist, believes that he was responsible for his mother's death and has never been back to the town. And therefore, when he goes back to the town, he encounters people that maybe his mother still knew or people he knew as a child, but he takes up the role of taxi driver. Now, the reason I chose taxi driver is my dad was a taxi driver for a couple of years before he passed. And he used to talk about the characters you used to get in the back of a taxi the same way he used to talk about the characters you met on the street on the beat. And that led me to think, well, what if a police constable was involved in mysteries? He's not a detective. He's never been that good with that sort of stuff. It's not a private detective. It's someone that just walked the streets for 30 years. And the nub of the stories is when he goes back, he effectively gets involved in, blackmailed is the best way to look at it, into looking into something small, which turns into something big. And in the first one, it's very much to do with his mother. In the second book, The Fracture, which is the one that's coming out, set in Fraserburgh and also set in Glasgow, the best way to describe it is there's three strands to how this book works. And the reason it works this way is there's various characters that run through the book that Blake interacts with. And in this case, there's three different stories that wind itself together. The best way to put them forward is right at the beginning of the book. Blake is driving a taxi late at night. He goes out from Fraserburgh back to Fraserburgh, drops someone off at 2 in the morning, and that person then walks out to the beach. Fraserburgh has a wonderful beach if you ever get a chance to look it up on Google Earth. But he walks to the beach and he kills himself. And Blake was the last person to see him alive. And he knows there's something wrong, but he's not sure what. The following day, he has to go to the funeral of a friend of his mother's. And when he's at the funeral, there's a storm blowing. It's one of the worst days Fraserburgh has had. The graveside is soaking wet. The grave is filling with water. And the son drops the coffin into the grave by mistake. And Blake swears he sees the coffin crack. And he then decides to look into that, and he begins to suspect that someone in town, the undertaker, might be swapping cheap coffins in for expensive ones because they've got money problems. And the last bit of it, and there is a third bit of it, is when Blake was a police officer back in the Glasgow Police, he used to have a fellow police constable called Mitch Campbell. Now, Mitch was his best friend. He was the best man at Mitch's wedding. He knows Mitch's wife. He knows Mitch's family. But after a few years, Mitch was caught on the fiddle. Mitch was using his police officer status to earn money. He then turns to be a criminal. But Blake never manages to shake him off. So through the two books, Mitch Campbell pulls his strings a bit because he knows stuff in the background. So the big thing in this book is that Mitch is in prison. He's waiting on to be taken to trial, and he blackmails Blake to come down to Glasgow to do something for him. So the way I kind of sum up the book is that there's a kind of Mitch madness going on in Blake's life. There's a coffin curiosity going on in Blake's life. And there's a Davy, who's the name of the guy that killed himself, dilemma. And what I wanted to do is weave those into one single story. I've set it in Fraserburgh because in my childhood, that's where I used to go. We went on holiday to Fraserburgh every single time we could. We went at weekends. We went for 2 weeks at a time. Sometimes we go for 6 or 7 weeks. In fact, the only place I had ever been on holiday until the age of 17 was Fraserburgh. So therefore, I know it well. However, I know it from my youth. So the good thing is I can drop some of that stuff into the book because I remember it. Because I'm a big fan of place. I'm a big fan of having been somewhere to write about it. Every single one of my 13 books has settings in it that I've either lived in, been in, visited. I've got enough knowledge in my head that I can walk my way around. You could argue I'm slightly lazy because at the end of the day, the reason I do that is that I don't have to remember where the house is or where the pub is, or it's just there. It sits in my imagination. In terms of the characters, how do I create the characters? Blake Glover is got a bit of me in. He's about the same age as me. My dad would have been a lot younger, but he's got a lot of my dad's traits. He's got a Glasgow police thing about him. Glasgow is one of the hardest cities in the world to police at the time, and he was on the street, so he knows how to deal with people. He's named Blake Glover, which is a bit weird because there's a very famous person in Fraserburgh that's famous nowhere else in the world except Japan. Thomas Blake Glover was born in Fraserburgh. If you look him up, you can go Google him. Thomas Blake Glover was born in Fraserburgh, left Fraserburgh when he was 19 and went to China. Left China when he was 21 and then set about transforming Japan. He is more or less seen as the father of the Industrial Revolution in Japan. If you know the brewery Kirin, that was started by Blake Glover. If you know the engineering company Mitsubishi, that was started by Blake Glover. If you had shipbuilding, modern shipbuilding in Japan was started by Blake Glover, and even the modern navy in Japan was started by Blake Glover, Thomas Blake Glover as was. And he got awarded the Order of the Rising Sun, second class by the Emperor himself, and his house is now a visitor attraction. And I used his second name and his final name, Blake Glover, because Blake's mother thought her kid was a wee hero and loved to name him after somebody in the what you call it, somebody famous, on the belief that one day he might be famous. Other characters in there, one of my favourites is a woman called Mrs. Lang, who knew the mother back in the day, who's one of those women that just says it as it is, pulls no punches, and therefore is a great character in the book for pulling Blake up. Because his mistake he makes through both the books is he forgets he's not a policeman, and therefore he screws up. And that's part and parcel of the joy of writing the book is he still thinks he's on the beat to a certain degree and has to learn he's not. So that's the cost and that's the fracture and that's the two books.
So you're saying that there are three different stories within the book. How do you create that and then put it together, or is as you're building one part of the story, or do the other two come up? How does that work for you?
I'm not a planner in any shape or form. I start with one line in the book and start writing, and I'll write about, I usually takes me about 6 or 7 thousand words to get into the spin of the story. So I'll just start writing out an idea and I'll get into the spin of it. Then what I'll do is pause, read what I've done, and then I do about 2,000 words a day. That's just my discipline. The reason I do that is I read that Stephen King wrote 2,000 words a day every day for his whole, and I thought, well, if I do that, I'll be as famous as Stephen King. Hasn't quite worked out, but that's why I still write 2,000 words a day. And then what I'll do is for about an hour after I've written, I'll spin what might happen next, just the next couple of thousand words. So the stories kind of come out of my writing. I'm not sitting there with an end game. And in fairness, in the first book, in The Cost, I got 5 pages from the end and I still didn't know what the end was. I had to actually rework it slightly to make it work. But I do that because it keeps it very fresh for me when I'm writing, and I hope it keeps it fresh for the readers because I don't actually know when you're reading what I've written. I didn't know what was going to happen next. So therefore, having three stories together was a bit tricky because it took a bit of unknitting and reknitting to get it to work. But it kind of just naturally flowed between one story and the other. So that's kind of how I do it.
So it feels like in some cases the story is coming through you, not necessarily by you, but ideas are coming, like some writers will say, the writing just kind of takes over. Is that what's happening?
Yeah. I write in first, these books, not all my books, but these books are written in first person, present tense. And therefore, I'm looking through the eye of the protagonist. So everything's kind of happening live in front of them. So when you're writing that way, you have to find clever ways to bring in the backstory because otherwise, they can't see outside of there. And that gives it an immediacy because you're doing what they're doing. And funnily enough, that's how you tend to write. So I know authors say this all the time, but the characters don't always do what you want. Like you've got them, you set off quite happily saying, right, they're going to go down here, walk down the street, meet this person, do the following, and then for whatever reason they trip up and they end up in hospital. And you think, oh, how did that happen? And for me, that's the beauty of doing it this way, is that you get a real sense of the person, a real sense of place, and you get their view on it. And that's why I quite like this idea of using a constable because it's not someone that's super intuitive when it comes to stuff like mysteries, comes to solving crimes. It's someone that's used to deal with day-to-day people that gets dragged into areas they don't want to and therefore have to work out how they're going to figure it all out.
And Mitch, how did you come up with that character? You're saying that Blake is more of an idea from your dad's experience. How did Mitch come up?
Oh, that goes back to I know Mitch's. I
Oh,
used to live in further. I live in the south of Glasgow. I used to live near a relatively poor area. Well, it wasn't a poor area, but it wasn't the greatest of areas. And a lot of the gangs around there, there was a lot of gangs where they used to be hanging around, and you would just bump into them. And there was always a Mitch Campbell. There was always someone who had aspirations to be more, but actually couldn't be bothered doing the work. So, in other words, they turned to crime because it was an easier way through. And in this case, Mitch Campbell came out of an idea. My father knew someone in the police that left very early. And although he didn't become a criminal, he was one of those people where if you needed a dodgy TV or you were looking for a new Rolex, he suddenly became the go-to person. And I have to say, back in the day, while a lot of the police, they weren't, they were guilty themselves. Our house used to be full of a lot of high tech for the 70s. We were the first people that had a VHS recorder, the first people with a colour television, the first people with an Afghan hound, and the police weren't that well paid. And the question was, where did this stuff come from? And probably came from a Mitch Campbell. And I just love that because there used to be an unwritten agreement. And my dad used to say this a lot of the low level criminality in Glasgow, the police had a working relationship with it. If they lifted people every single time they found something, it just didn't work. So therefore, there was a sort of give and take. And if you stepped over a line, now that's changed a bit, but Mitch uses that for Blake. He knows where the secrets are, where the skeletons are buried.
yes, it was a very interesting read, and the food was very interesting. I cannot imagine what this poor man's body looks like.
He lives on candy and soda, and the traditional diet for Scots is called a fish supper or fish and chips. And Blake more or less lives on soda, candy, and fish and chips. I
Yes,
know.
yes. And the interesting thing is you both mentioned Legos in your book. I thought that was really interesting that both of you had a little part where there's a Lego, which you'll have to read the books to see what I'm talking about.
I have this thing in the past. You know that thing about standing on Lego with your bare feet?
Oh gosh, yes.
How?
Yeah, that is singly one of the most painful things you can do on a hard floor. And that's Lego frequently comes into the book because it's a great way to get someone to scream. You know, if you're silently creeping around a house, stand in a block of Lego and you're going to shout out.
Yes, that's true.
Yes.
Yes. Is there anything else you'd like to share? I mean, I really have to say I enjoyed both books. They're both very different. And I'm sorry that I was saying that was England because I knew it was in Ireland, but it was just really the psychology of it was very interesting. And then the criminal aspect of the fracture. They're both so different, but very, very interesting reading.
Thank you.
No, thanks very much for the chance for doing this. This is it's really kind of you. It's brilliant to be able to do something like this.
It's fun for us to hear about your books and to hear about your creative process and what's up next for both of you.
Oh gosh, always writing. Well, I think I don't know about you, Morgan Gordon, but we've just been bitten by the bug. So I'm
Oh yeah.
32 books and counting over here. And so writing the next Gregory, actually, which is now up to number 7. So, there's plenty of good reading to look forward to if people do enjoy his character. And then I'm on to, I think it's number 25 or 26 for my Ryan series. So yeah, always busy, keep him busy.
Yeah, Louise, you are busy, busy, busy. I'm out there. I'm on book 3 and 4 of this. I'm working on at the moment, coming out, and then because they're more or less in a kind of fit state, it's just with the publisher at the moment for a conversation. I've also just vanished into 1662 Scotland for a mystery book. So I'm
Ooh,
back at way back to do with witch trials, to do with how the law worked back then, and to do an advocate, a solicitor back then. So I'm currently working on a book set in 1662, which is interesting. It's very different to Glasgow in the current day, or Fraserburgh, put it that way. Very different to Fraserburgh.
Well, thank you both, and thank you, your publishers, for sponsoring the program. And books are available at Broad and we really appreciate your time and looking forward to the next books. I know that both of you are reviewed on Goodreads and hearing a lot of good things about both of your books. So thank you.
No problem. Thanks very much.
yeah. Thank you.